Okay, and here we are today with another episode of our We United podcast, Voices of Innovation. I am super honored today to be sitting here with Jillian Cicchetti, who came to our We United Summit for the first time and was super grateful to meet you, Jillian. I thought I would have you on the podcast because you are living the life of a surgeon. And there's so many leadership nuggets we could take from you. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to you real quick just to introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. My name's Jillian Cicchetti. I was super blessed to be invited to the We Summit this year. And actually, it's a bit of a funny story. My husband is a professor at the University of Denver, where Jackie's daughter goes to school. And when Jackie was looking for a speaker, her daughter said, "Oh, I have this professor. He speaks all over the country. You should have him come." And that was sort of the plan. And then Jackie's daughter actually saw me speak at my husband's event and said, "Wait a minute, Mom. I think you should invite his wife to come." And so I like to say that I kind of swiped this one out from under my husband, but he was so excited for me to try something new, because although I had spoken and on this topic to quite a few audiences, it was mostly small professional groups where I live. And this was really my first, what I would consider a big stage presence. So thank you, Jackie, for inviting me. It was a lovely experience.
Thank you for being there. I think it brought a sense of realness. I think some people after the fact said to me, the ones that were sitting close were like, "Oh, we could see the tears in her eyes." Like, this was a real session. And before we get on to the rest of the podcast, maybe just give a brief overview of what your session was and why we had you come and speak.
Sure. What I speak about is a concept that I think a lot of us live in, especially in the workplace, but we sometimes live in it without realizing it. And so it's this idea of a toxic culture, or even personally what I would call toxic success. So a concept of, hey, my life looks great from the outside. I'm doing all the things. I'm making the money. I have the title. I have the leadership position. But my success and my job and my culture is keeping me from actually fully living my life. And so the concept in the talk is, can you recognize a toxic culture if you're in one? How do we, what effects does that culture have on us? And then how do we either get ourselves out of it or change the culture from within? So that is the main topic that I speak about.
Yes, and I wish everyone could see that session, because you gave a real story of your life and when you were entrenched in some type of a toxic environment and not catching yourself. But we'll leave that for another time. And, I have to come to a We Summit to see things like this. But anyway, appreciated that session very much.
Thank you. Honor.
But, so moving forward, so here you are a leader. I wanted you to come on because I think, sometimes we get stuck in our own industry and we get stuck in our own mindsets. And I think it's really important to pull in leadership outside of ourselves, right? So outside of what we're doing every day, to see, are we really hitting the mark and can we make some adjustments, right? I think it's really important to always do that. But it was fascinating to me. And come to find out, we have something in common where we both have been to. Yes, we both have been to Uganda. And Para, where we both took that, the adventure there, but separately. I'm just so impressed. But you went, I was there scoping out some organizations that we were going to align with and help contribute to, just as an organization, and also for me personally to, help give back and to align with something with the need in Uganda. But you were there. Why don't we start there? What were you doing there recently? And tell us about this experience.
Sure. So I just got back about 3 weeks ago, and it was my second time visiting Uganda. I got an opportunity 2 years ago through an organization that my church supports. The name of the organization is Musana Community Development Organization, and they specialize in economic development. So the idea is, if you want to get rid of poverty, you have to solve poverty, which is not buying someone a meal or sponsoring a child. Those things help, but they don't get rid of poverty. In fact, sometimes those ways of helping, those charitable organizations can actually enable the cycle of poverty, right? You take the dignity away from the person you're trying to serve and you make it about you. You get to sponsor the child, you get to buy the goat, you get to do all of those things. Where what Musana really does is, how do we bring the skills to the people who live there? How do we help them, enable them to start an economic, social enterprise that they are in charge of, that they get to run, that they get to develop, and then hand it off to them, right? Trust them to take those skills and run with it. And so I was able to go 2 years ago. They, the group I work with, they start all the social enterprises first. And what I mean by that is they've already built a school, a hotel, a guest house, all these enterprises that are making money. And then the last thing they put down is a hospital. And that's just because the hospital, pulls a lot more resources. It's much harder to be profitable in a hospital as opposed to the other organizations. So I was asked to come 2 years ago with a medical team. I was the only surgeon on the team. And that trip was really, I think for me, a little bit more of a come and see trip. Like, can I go to this place and do surgery? What do they have? What do they not have? Because this place is 3 hours away from a big hospital, like a hospital that you and I would recognize as a hospital. And so that first trip was really confirming for me that this was work I wanted to be involved in. And so this time last year, they asked me if I would lead a full surgical trip. So we went, there were 12 people on our trip, and 3 surgeons, an anesthesiologist, several other providers, and a whole slew of support staff. And we were able to go, we did 47 surgeries in a week. We trained about 45 people on some advanced surgical techniques. And you know what? We had so much fun. I honestly haven't laughed that much in years. And, we bonded over the shared difficulty of being in Uganda. And we met so many amazing people, made good relationships. And I'm just so grateful I had a chance to participate.
Oh, I think that's amazing. And for people listening, maybe some people have been to Uganda, but for those who haven't, it is not an easy trip. Sleeping conditions, I don't care where you go, are probably not the greatest. And you're literally there because you want to do something of impact and you want to help, and that's what drives you forward. But it's also very dangerous. I felt like it doesn't mean I wouldn't go again. And I would encourage people to go and do that and just cover yourself in serious prayer. But it's really it's not an easy trip. And the resources are not there. So when we say a hospital in Uganda, I imagine it's not staffed with all the things that you need here, doesn't have all the equipment, doesn't have all the tools. There's really no paved roads that I saw in Uganda. So, this is real, not a lot of order in the driving conditions. So you bring the surgeon part of it and doing all the surgeries, that's one aspect, but you're also navigating the elements, right? And so a lot of credit for doing that. Did you notice hardship with your teams and people being in very different conditions than we're used to in the United States?
I am blessed to be involved in an organization that's been bringing teams over for a long time. And honestly, if you want to go do something in a country like that, I recommend that you work with an organization that's established. I've seen people who say, I'm going to go to the jungles of the Philippines and pop up a card table and distribute medications. And that is not a helpful thing to do. Work with people on the ground who know the local culture and the language. And so we did have guides and drivers most of the time, but of course it's hard. Our travel there door to door is 44 hours. And on the way back was about 36, 38 hours. It's a long trip. You're sleep deprived, you're hot. Operating under gowns and lights in 95 degrees without air conditioning is not a walk in the park. But we spent 9 months training our team, 9 months. And we selected them very carefully. And I was more concerned, we're not doing super advanced surgery there. I don't need somebody with this amazing skill set. I need somebody with an amazing heart who's open and flexible and ready to flex and bend with what gets thrown at us. And I'm incredibly grateful. There were 12 people on the team. Usually if you go on something like that, there's always one complainer. We didn't have one. We really didn't have a complainer. And
That's
despite
good.
every single one of us having some GI distress throughout the trip, our ongoing joke, forgive us, we're medical people, but our ongoing joke was no one has pooped their pants yet. So we're still having a good trip.
So funny. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah. But no, my team was amazing. And I think for me, I've never led any sort of ministry event before. I've participated, but I've never led something like this before. And I think the biggest gift that I got from the trip this time as a leader was getting to see my team's hearts change, like to watch a person grow, to see them struggle with some stuff, and by the end of training they're kind of getting it, and then by the time we get there they're getting it more, and by the end of the week they're flourishing. That was a huge gift that I was not expecting. So I think part of why I love this work is the work we do there. But now I'm getting to see these people that I worked with for a year, and they're home now, and they're thinking, how do I bring the lessons that I learned in Africa back to my everyday life at the hospital, or my everyday life with my kids, or whatever? And that's really beautiful. How often do we get a ringside seat to the change in someone's heart? Not very often. So it's great.
Not very often. And, I think you mentioned flexing. We're in a time now, I don't care what industry you're in, if you're a surgeon or you're an executive at a corporation or you're a stay-at-home mom, it doesn't matter where you are. The flex we're all going to have in these times is pretty severe. So would you say that, what if I look at what you did with your teams and coming back, what were some of those really impactful leadership lessons that maybe they did take from that? I mean, we know the flexing, they got to be willing to adjust, but is there anything else you could think of that they experienced that you would say this made them a better surgeon, a better leader?
Yeah, one of the things we train on is the concept that when we go on a trip like this, we're very strategically moving out of one concept of time and into a different concept of time. So these are two concepts called chronos and kairos. They're both Greek words. And chronos time is your time clock, your calendar, your schedule, I've got to be somewhere at this time. And kairos time is, we would call it like in God's time, or, as things happen, as your life lines up, you might miss, I don't know, a flight, right? And you can get all bent out of shape about the fact that you missed this flight, or you can be like, hey, why did I miss this flight? What's going to happen to me in these next 3 hours? Maybe I needed a rest and a rejuvenation. Maybe I needed to talk to this woman who's sitting right here next to me because she's lovely and she taught me a life lesson. To sort of the idea that your life is happening to you the way it's supposed to happen to you, and not in any other way. And so we taught specifically about, as we leave for our trip to Uganda, we are entering Kairos time. And we would talk about that a lot. And so we didn't give them a schedule. We gave them what we called a brainstorm for tomorrow. Like, this is what we think we're going to do, but I'm not sure if that's what we're actually going to do. And, these are all type A doctor people. What's up on doc tomorrow, But I think in a sense, they were also really grateful. You mean I don't have to keep to a time schedule? No, we start when we're ready. When the patients are all ready, we end when we're done. It's easy when you're on a trip away from your family. You don't have anywhere you have to be. But that was something we very intentionally taught about.
Wow, that's really good input. I really like that. And by the way, my daughter went to a school where they had in the senior year, everybody went on this trip called Kairos.
Oh, really?
So it's interesting that you talked about that. And it was literally the most impactful trip of her life. Like, I really believe it was life-changing. And again, something that people don't think about and talk about, we're going to get into some other topics right now, but, in leadership, of course, we want to address our emotional well-being, our mental well-being, our spiritual well-being, our physical well-being. There's so many different aspects, right, of ourselves that we have to address. when we're looking at our lives, and especially when we're looking at leadership. It's really important. So I love that you did something that has meaning. So for people listening, what is that for you, right? What is it that is going to fuel your soul? Go do that, because you will be better for it, and the people around you will be better for it. So whatever that means, for people listening. But I also think, if I look back at Uganda, just real quick before we get on to the next topic, I saw such a difference in people there. And I think it's important to address this too, because we get so caught up in our society and how we think things should be. I found them to be the happiest people on earth. They were lovely, pleasant, helpful, just really great people. And not that I was expecting anything different, but seeing the dirt roads and seeing the poverty and seeing how they live, and how a lot of them really don't have barely enough to get by. Mm-hmm. And in every household, you're lucky if you would have one car. So what is your take on that? When you're coming over here from the US, right? We're all so blessed, and we have a lot in the grand scheme of things, right? And then you go over there. So how do you look at this and see the difference in cultures?
Yeah, I think I'd almost flip that on its head and say that I'm not sure that they're the happiest people in the world. As you know, there's still a lot of hardship and pain there. I actually think we're coming out of a toxic culture of being a very unhappy culture here. We have so much, and yet we are so sad and lonely. Yes. And I think that comes from, you go over there and they have a poverty of things and money, but they have a lot of time. They're not as distracted as we are. They're not getting pinged all day long. Not everybody has a cell phone there. They're not surrounded by televisions and commercials and advertisements at all times. They are in some ways, but their life is quieter. And so they are very rich in community. I mean, they care for each other, because you can hear what's going on next door, and you know that next month you might not have that resource. So you're going to share with them so that they share back with you. I think I mentioned this to you when we chatted before, Jackie, is, we're in a culture now where you won't even go next door to borrow some eggs for your cake or a wrench for the garage, because you can just order it to come tomorrow morning or in 4 hours. I'll just Instacart it or whatever. And that's robbed us of the joy of being able to support each other. One of the ways you show love to somebody is by letting them help you. Seems backwards a little bit, but if you're this strong, independent woman who doesn't need anybody and doesn't need anything, I mean, I guess that's good, but truly you will find yourself lonely, because people want to be a part of your life. And people want to help when they see you struggling, and you showing your vulnerabilities allows you to connect with the people that are maybe underneath you in your organization or your colleagues. You can build a big wall around yourself if you don't ever need anybody. And I think you just see people that are a little more real when we're over there. Those walls aren't up, and they don't have a digital screen between each other all the time like we do.
Yeah, and it makes me sad. I think that what we're trying to do here, is part of a huge part of it, is just connecting community, is bringing people together from across all, cultures, religions, backgrounds, professions, to say, because it is so important. And sometimes all people have is that virtual component right now. It's like, it's like the never ending COVID. I feel like sometimes we're all stuck on meetings all the time. We're all, in the business world and corporate America, we're all just stuck behind a computer, meeting after meeting after meeting.
It's not that you can't connect that way. We've all learned to do that, right? But I think there's something about being together. Our team meetings preparing for our Uganda trip were all required, and they were all in person unless you had to be virtual, right? And a few people were virtual, but there was one team member in another state, and none of us really got to meet her in person until we arrived in DC and met her. And there is a difference. Yeah. So that real in-person, flesh and blood people, right? Like, we need more of that for sure.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, okay, so I want to get into leadership stuff, but I want to also ask you, As a surgeon, I just have to ask the question because, we're here on earth and we all, none of us makes it out of here alive, right? We have our time
Right.
period here and it's for a purpose. And hopefully people are truly living their purpose. Like you just hope and pray that. But how do you see, you know, as a surgeon, you deal with so much. I'm sure you encounter death so much.
Mm.
How do you resolve that in your mind? Does it make you depressed? Does it ever get you down? How do you see death?
Mm. I don't see it as much anymore because I've toned down my practice and I'm not doing as much emergency work. But for a good 20 years of my younger life, I certainly was around emergent things, emergency surgeries. I certainly have seen more people die than most people I know, for sure. And I think when you're around that, you start to see that there's such a thing as a good death and a bad death, right? Like, wow, that one was really peaceful and lovely, and the family was there, and everybody got to say what they needed to say, and wow, that one was really awful, and I don't think that patient would have wanted to happen what the family made happen at the end. Like you see such a spectrum of what that can look like, and it's very I don't think most people think of death as a good death. My daughters and I had this conversation recently, and one of them was like, a good death doesn't make any sense. But there's a great book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. We discussed this before. And he talks about how almost every woman in the United States who enters the hospital to have a baby, a planned pregnancy and a planned, I know when I'm going to deliver, I know what hospital, has a birth plan, right? There's a soul coming into the world, and she knows what she wants the room to be like, and the music, and who she wants to have there, and what she wants to eat, and all the things. But every single one of us, no matter our age, we're guaranteed to experience death, which is, your soul leaving this world. Whatever you believe about what happens after, we will all experience that. And I've met very few people with a death plan, right? Like what I want that to be like, who I want to be there. And I think it's because in our country, we don't like to speak about death. Death is scary. Death is painful. And while it can be both of those things, there are whole industries devoted, hospice workers and end-of-life care workers that are devoted to providing you with a really lovely experience as you or your loved one leaves the world. And I think a change in focus on, what death is doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be painful. I've been in some rooms where the experience feels very holy, like, wow, kind of the same way a baby comes into the world, like, wow, that person just left and they had a life well lived and a bunch of people that loved them and a legacy that goes on. And that's a pretty beautiful thing.
I love that too. So I think, for those listening, it's a life plan is important and a death plan is also very important. I think that's such a good point. We hardly ever talk about that. I don't know why, but, I think it does require.
Yeah, even people with like end stage cancer, they come into the hospital and they haven't had those conversations. And that's really quite sad. Yeah.
No, that is quite sad to me. And I think it's so taboo. But you have to, I think, come from a place of having, maybe there's atheists, there's different people, like everybody's got all different backgrounds, but it's just reconciling wherever you are. What does that represent for you later, right? And so that's something really interesting to think through. But leadership. So, here we are, the voices of innovation, right? Podcast. So if we take things we're talking about, right? You've had your own life experience before with some of your trials and your like we all have as we're going up in our careers, and personal sacrifices and things like that. All your experience with some of your give back, but you're a mom and you have children and you have a husband and you have this very full life. If you could get this message to rising leaders, even people in leadership roles right now that are, managing all of this, what is it you would say to rising leaders? Like in all of your experience, you said you're kind of backing up a little bit now, and you have a little more time. You've had time to think through this. You're speaking now. What are those leadership lessons that you can impart on our listeners?
Sure. Well, some of the things that we learn, while we're learning to become a surgeon. So this is mostly during residency. You're called all the time to respond to crisis situations, whether that's in the operating room, in the emergency room. I mean, a regular operation that goes well with no hiccups has a lot of steps, and any one of those steps can go wrong. But when something really does go wrong in the operating room and you're faced with a crisis situation, the first thing they tell you to do is take your own pulse, not the patient's. Like, take a deep breath, realize you've been trained for this, you know what to do, you know the steps, and then do them. Getting upset and getting angry and yelling and throwing things. I mean, there are plenty of surgeons who still do that. It's much better than it used to be, but that does not help anything. That does not push your team in any good direction. Actually, that makes things much worse. So high stakes situations, high stakes management of people, it's the same, staying calm, trusting your team. You've trained them for this purpose. They should know what to do. So leaning on them, and slowing down in that moment and really, taking a step back to think, hey, what are we doing this for to begin with? And then I think also, especially when you're a leader, I mean, you're the one who really decides the direction of your boat and the culture of your boat. And you might be leading a very toxic culture and not even recognize it, because especially those of us who've been in a toxic industry, right? I mean, becoming a surgeon, you guys haven't read a book like The House of God or like any of these books or any even TV show about becoming a doctor. The ringer that people are put through emotionally, spiritually, physically, all of those things. It's very easy to end up with a very toxic culture on the backside, and you don't recognize it because you've been in it so long. Mm-hmm. So trying to look at your industry or your culture with fresh eyes is hard. You can do that as a leader through some anonymous surveys. I mean, it's hard to do it in an interview style with the boss, right? Are they really going to tell you what you need to hear? Probably not. But some sort of anonymous surveys, or even somebody who can come in and interview your team, in some way and give you sort of a third person perspective. But there's probably some toxic element to everybody's workplace. And so, how do you root that out? The only way you're going to make it better is if, first of all, as the leader, you care about that. Mm-hmm. And if you can root that out within your system, you will have people who not only perform better for you, but want to stay forever, and work for you, because they're not going to find that in many other places. I'm trying with my business now to build a team of people and trying to make it a place that they can't find anywhere else, that they feel cared for. One takeaway I took from that We United, from the We Summit, was one of your speakers said, do not have performance reviews, have career development meetings. And I have implemented that in my office as I get back. And I love that idea. Even if you're only with me for 2 years, I care about you. And if you want something bigger and better for yourself, you won and I won if we do this the right way. So I loved that. Those would be my tips.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate that, because I do think it's a different type of stress. We deal with supply chain issues and all kinds of stuff in the electronics ecosystem, and it could be very high pressure, high stress, very urgent. People, and some equipment that, if a customer who's, say, making medical equipment is lying down, you're talking people's lives, right? And so there are some very urgent situations. But I like that, is as a leader, stay calm, right? Take your own pulse. We've seen a lot of not great behavior that is very tolerated when these situations come up. And I think I like that discussion about the industry culture, because sometimes the industry becomes so complacent with what we're accepting that it can become super destructive. So these podcasts are meant to be like individual leadership. What can each and every one of us do to look at ourselves, not point the fingers at others, but to say, okay, where do I recognize myself in these conversations?
And then I also think that as a leader, you have the ability to point out some of that behavior in your underlings if you see it in a kind way. But I'll give a very silly example, but it drives me crazy. In doctors' offices, so many people in charge, they'll say, like, I'll have my girls call your girls. I'll have my girls call your girls. And I'm like, they're not girls. They're
Right.
women. In fact, they're older than you. Like,
Yeah.
please do not call them that, right? And so that is one little thing that as a leader, I can always, and even my girls will call themselves girls. And we're like, that's not who you are. Please don't say that. So I do think you're right. Taking control of your own stuff is really important. But if you consider yourself a leader, you should also set those expectations in the people that you have influence over.
That's a very big hot button for me because many of the leaders, although meaning well, and they could be good leaders themselves, it's I think one of the major leadership crises we have going on right now, just across our industry, but also across many industries, is people not doing what you said, recognizing toxic behavior in their people. Maybe they've been with them a long time, all these different reasons. Maybe they have a personal relationship outside of work. Maybe there's all these codependencies or who knows what it is. But you can be the best leader that you want to be. But if you're allowing bad behavior and just turning a blind eye just because you're not courageous enough to nip that, that is not good leadership. That is right. That's an active contributor to a very toxic environment.
And a lot of people really feel bad when you point it out. Like, it really wasn't on purpose.
Yes.
It's a cultural. We've always been able to say that, it's never been a problem. Oh, I can see how that might rub you the wrong way. So
yeah, no, I think you're right. It's just, it's having the adult conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And finally, to conclude, these podcasts go so fast. I wish it's like, oh, we're already getting to be time. But what is it? So I always ask people this question at the end of the interviews. But what is it in your soul and your spirit that brings you the most joy in your life? And what is it that actually would make you cry in your soul, just as a human?
As a human, I love watching people really fulfill their potential. Like, I see it in my children, watching them become who they want to be, in my employees. Like, I love watching somebody get an idea in her head. I want to do this thing, help enable her to do it, and then watch her thrive. I love that. And I feel like this second half of my career, that's really what I want to do with it. I mean, operating on patients and helping them is wonderful, but helping somebody go from earning $40 an hour to $150 an hour because I helped her learn the skills and the business acumen to get there, that feels really good to me. I love that. And I think the reverse of that is also true. It makes me so sad when people, we all face hardship. We all face hard, painful things in our lives. And a lot of people never open up enough to let that pain go, right? Whether it's a counselor or your spouse or your best friend, or people lock themselves into a box of pain and they don't ever let it go. And I see, honestly, a lot of my girlfriends or people in my life who it's very hard to open up and to go into those hard places, but there is life on the other side of it. And so I'm very sad when I see somebody who lets their bitterness to the past keep them from growing and keep them from really being who they could be. So I think that's what makes me cry in my soul. I've never been asked that question before.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that, because I also think it's really good evaluation. I do this once a year thing where I literally evaluate all my relationships on paper. I do this every single year at the end of the year, and I write down everyone that's in my life, everyone that's I'm influencing, that is influencing me personally, professionally. And who is it that I want more time with, that I want to develop more of a relationship with? And who is it that I just gently need to kind of maybe move away from at that period of time in my life, right? And just really reevaluating, because I also know for me, sometimes I've had certain friends that if you disclose a vulnerable information, you don't want that used against you, or you don't want to, so it's being with the right people who are there, right, to catch you when you fall, and never using anything against you in that moment too. So having those good people around you. And really, to conclude everything, is that, we talked about legacy, and really the main point I think we learned at the summit too. Dave Doherty did that session. I loved talking to him. He's an excellent leader. He's a humane leader. And I love that he pointed out that his people catch him, right, when there's things going on, and will be honest with him. Love that he can receive information. But one of the things that he said that struck me is, nobody's going to build a statue for you when you're gone. And I just think that people don't always recognize that. But what is your legacy? Because it's such a popular thing that people are talking about is legacy, but we don't get to pick it. Our legacy finds us after the fact. And it could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later. You could have a leader who was exceptional in their time because they just did what was status quo or popular or whatever. But later you look back and you go, oh, what a jerk that person was, right? And their legacy, it's redefined. So by our actions, by our decisions, by everything we do later, much later, is when our legacy is really defined for us. So what is your wish for what your legacy would be here on earth?
Gosh, I just hope that I spend my time here helping to make things better for people. I really want that in my daughters. My husband and I are very intentional about the way that we raise our kids. We want them to be able to go out into the world with the same idea that we're here and this world has a lot of problems. And so we should spend our energy helping people and making the world a little bit better when you go to bed at night than it was when you woke up in the morning. So I guess I hope that I can fulfill that. And I hope that I raise daughters with the same idea of how they should spend their life, whatever they choose to do. We hope they don't become professionals in the same way that we did. Because I think it stole a lot of the young part of our life. If they want to, great, we'll support them. But I think that if the ultimate goal is to make the world a better place with the work that you do every day, that can be done through making cupcakes or art or music or caring for animals. There's so many ways that you can fulfill that. So I hope that's my legacy, making the world a little bit better at the end of the day than it was when I woke up. And I hope my daughters will do the same thing.
Well, I have no doubt, just by the parents they have, that they will be contributors of the world and that they will help. And you did impact people at our summit and had a lasting impact there. So I just want to thank you and just say how lovely it has been connecting with you. And obviously we'll stay connected.
Yeah, likewise, Jackie. Thanks. I hope we'll do some more things together in the future.
Yes. Well, thank you for being here. And this concludes this episode of the We United Voices of Innovation podcast.